Thank you, Ravi. Any questions for Ravi?
Hello. So be able to hear you speak and hear all your different perspectives. Since I don't know if this has been addressed before, but I just need to know now. Since the new bill, the contempt bill has been passed, has it impounded your work, regarding ongoing cases in any form? Does my question make sense?
What shall I say? Let me see. Last time we don't have to reflect so clearly about these issues. Now, the thing is that I think there is a misconception on the Contempt of Court Act, actually. The law minister says that there's actually no change. And that we have, I'm not saying that, I could see the expression coming from, don't kena contempt, that Kirsten. No, what I'm saying is that, of course, the law had been, changed, and there have been stiffer penalties, and the regime had changed in terms of the police, that, the police have powers now. It has become an arrestable offense. But I think fundamentally, I think we must get this clear. Sub judice is a concept whereby you, in fact, comment to influence the proceedings. Sub judice is not, look at what Eugene was presenting earlier. He was talking about the constitutional challenge that was before the court, the four people that he's representing. He's basically presenting what are the arguments, what are the contentions, what are the issues before the court. And of course, there are some criticisms that these were addressed in court. So these are actually factual issues, and the contentions which are presented, which were factual, actually. So we need not be so constrained about this issue. In fact, you can comment about the case if you don't seek to influence the proceedings. So there's no, we should not get too caught up by the fear factor there. But I do understand your concerns, because that is how the chilling effect has gone into the minds of the public.
Okay, because I feel like the bill was really vague, and then me as like a common person, I don't understand all the words that they use, to the point I have to Google every word that comes out in the bill so I understand it better. And a lot of my friends who tune in and they ask like, so what's going on? You can't talk about anything now? Like, are we becoming North Korea? So what is it exactly? So okay, that clears up a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, so I got a question. Like, a lot of the death penalty issues seems to be quite related to drug-related issues, and it seems that globally, right? Like even America has understand that its war on drugs didn't really yield any good results. And what can we really do when you have a government that can stand in front of the UN and say, oh, show me a better scenario, our method works, kind of thing. I mean, you do have the opposite end of America right now, which is Philippines trying to copy them and really taking the war on drugs on a whole new level. But yeah, what can we really do when the Singapore government can just stand in front of the whole world and say, show me the research, this doesn't make sense, when there's actually research showing that the war on drugs doesn't work?
I think even locally, this is something that I also wanted to address earlier. In 2004, during when Vignesh Murthy, in 2003, when he was executed, Amnesty International released its report saying that Singapore is the Disneyland of death penalty, because we had the highest per capita execution in the world. That was in 2004. In 2009, 2010, we had 0 executions. During Yong Wei Kong's constitutional challenge, they couldn't execute people. And of course, the executions have declined. But that does not mean that we are happy with the death penalty. So we have also managed to, they are also revisiting their own principle, because in 2010, the law minister said that if Yong Wei Kong is to be spared the death penalty, then other masterminds will just game the system and so on and so forth. Basically, you should not be given the pardon or the clemency. But in 2012, the law changed and Yong Wei Kong was the first to benefit. So they are confronted also with these issues. But of course, there are better examples. I mean, Singapore is not the best example of all this. Norway, Scandinavian countries, and even South Korea has abolished the death penalty. How is it that they are able to tackle this? So there are definitely better examples in the region as well.
I have a question about the cases where they were executed, right? and those who did not get executed. Now, do you think that where they came from mattered, i.e. their nationality? Because I vaguely remember that there were some European or some Caucasian person, and then after that they amended the charge against the person so that they will escape the death penalty. And part of the reason is that these countries, they will make a lot of noise because they fight for their citizens. So whereas if you're from Nigeria and from some third world country, there are no voices on behalf of them. So do you recall any cases where it matters where they came from?
This question can land you into contempt of court if you're not careful, But anyway, no. But there are two issues. One is. Eugene, do you want to?
Someone has to act for you and they arrest you.
That's true. And I really thank Eugene for giving me all the support over the years, which I am deeply grateful. And I publicly acknowledge that. Now, there are two issues. One is actually the legal process and the judicial, that's another process. Let me just talk about this unfairness in terms of nationality. Now, in the case of that Nigerian boy, Amara Tochi, who was executed in Singapore, and that boy didn't have any visits from any of his family members. It was so sad. He was alone, and this Nigerian embassy lady goes and sees him, and also other inmates, and that was the time when I saw him. It's like, it's so important. He wants to see his mother, he wants to see his father, he wants to see his brother, anyone from his village. None of them could come because of poverty. They were so poor. And finally, with the support of the death penalty groups, we managed to get finance to get the Nigerian lawyer. Nigeria it's a Commonwealth country, and to fly down to Singapore to have access to him in the prison, so that this Nigerian lawyer, who was also campaigning in Nigeria on behalf of Amara Tochi, he could have access to him. We wrote to the prison with a supporting letter from, in fact, even the embassy to confirm that he's actually the lawyer for Tochi to visit him. That request was denied. Can you imagine? That lawyer couldn't have access to Tochi in Singapore because he's not admitted to advocate and solicitor. But what happened when the Australian boy, when he had that Australian Queen's Counsel and also the solicitor who had or two barristers, from Australia. How is it that they were able to visit? They are not called to the Singapore bar. They're not advocates and solicitors. So, to me, I don't have full facts, but on the face of it, there's apparent biasness. And even on Yong Wei Kong's case, Chow Ying from Malaysia, she wanted to visit Yong Wei Kong as a Malaysian representative from Malaysia, his representative from Malaysia. So, as a legal representative from Malaysia, but she was also denied access because she's not called as an advocate and solicitor to the Singapore bar, so she's denied. So we see an apparent discrimination here. But the case that you are touching upon is actually the case of Julia Boll, the German lady who was initially charged for drug trafficking, and then her charges were reduced, and that raised a lot of questions about the fact that is it because the German government was powerful and so on and so forth. Mr. Subhash Anandan, who was a criminal lawyer, was handling the case. He did say that the German government intervened at an early stage compared to, for example, even the Australian boy who was executed in Singapore, the Australian Vietnamese. So what goes behind, what negotiations and all that, of course there will be official communications and so on and so forth. That is something that does happen, but to what extent the discrimination, I think, you might want to read Alan Shadrick's book. He has certain views, and I will reserve my comments there.
I just wanted to add to that point. It's not, it may not necessarily be a nationality issue, but maybe what the political fallout is if you execute someone. In 1994, for instance, a Filipino domestic worker, Flor Contemplacion, was executed. and the resulting political outcry of that was so massive. Singapore flags were being burned. It affected diplomatic relations. So since then, I've been tracking this. Any domestic worker that's been charged for murder, somehow the charges get changed, and she never faces the gallows. So, and you'll see that domestic workers worldwide, anywhere when they are going to be executed, whether it's in Indonesia, as in Mary Jane Veloso last year, or the Sri Lankan domestic worker or Filipino domestic worker that's going to be executed in the Middle East, there will always be huge campaigns around it. Yeah, so domestic workers in a way have become like they've attained some kind of national heroine status, especially in countries like the Philippines and the Indonesia, which really sends many of these women abroad. So executions for this category of women then it's always very sensitive, and I think Singapore has certainly felt it, so that's why we don't really see domestic workers being executed. I think this year only there have been 2 cases of domestic workers being charged in court for murdering their employers, but somehow they don't get executed. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one more point on following up on Ravi's point, saying that it's really important to be able to hear from the inmates themselves, and Wee Kong was able to send letters and publish letters. What we found with Jabing's case is that he was not allowed to send letters. He was not allowed to pass messages out. He was not allowed to even give his sister a letter to bring out to us. The letter would be taken off her before she leaves. And to the point that one day, Jumai came out from the prison and she was very angry because she said a prison officer accused her of trying to write notes while visiting her brother and said, "You cannot do that. I saw you with paper and pen. Why are you doing that?" And she was very upset because she said, firstly, I wasn't writing a note. I was sending something because they tried to pass him a VCD and it was not allowed. So she had to sign a form to say that she acknowledges that it was rejected and she has the disc back. And so she was just signing that, and she said, oh, and then they accused me of writing notes. So to the point where even the sister is not allowed to write notes while visiting Jabing is very worrying, because you are cutting him off completely from communicating with people outside. And also that's just very worrying, because what if he has instructions that he wanted his sister to pass on to a lawyer or something, and she's not allowed to write notes and she can't remember the exact wording. It's very difficult for family members to deal with. And so that was one thing that we were concerned about. But then when we asked other inmates' families, they are like, oh, but my brother can write letters, he can send letters out. So one thing that we were concerned about, and I think one thing we should look at, is also scrutiny of prison practice and whether rules are arbitrarily enforced on different inmates.
Okay, hi. About the letters, all of this thing, I think they have the access, but they still have to take about like 1 month, 2 months to release out the letters to be given out to the family members. Anyway, the things about I would like to ask is that, what is the best approach to really create the education that Eugene were mentioning about, like, to the is it to the sorry about that, is it towards to the government, to the policymaker, or to the society itself? Because to understand that the rates that they will be indulging in Singapore is very high, since like 2015 until now, and I guess it's not only about drugs issue, but there's other inmates whose inside is still waiting for, on death rows, and there's inmates who's just been caught and just sentenced for at least like 1 week, then without no cause, access with family members to tell what happened to them, then just directly went to jails terms, correct? So what is the privilege as a citizen or a person in Singapore, whereas you are practicing with like asking for justice, this and this, but the system is still like not doing justice for the people itself. The society is still like thinking that it's okay to keep having the race on drugs issue related to drugs does create some problem with the societies, and it's okay to do having like, to go on, to create for like having death sentence in Singapore. There's like everything is okay because they will came down to our workshop and listen to all the conference, whatever, attend all the elections, like last year election 2015, everyone was like attending all the rallies for the opposition parties. But why at the period of moment, we know who win? Why nobody create that changes when you have that privilege to do that? And you still like asking, for justice to be done in Singapore, whereas when there is a period that you can be done to change, why don't you change it? So what I was asking is that what is the best, meaning what is, who is the best person that we really need to educate? The government, the policymaker, the society itself. Because don't another 5 years down the road again, when there's election moments, I still see the white person win for so many years already. It's a very sad issue for 2015 because the amount that was, okay. So basically, that's the, who's the person that we really need to educate?
It's a very good question. I think it follows up on something which Kristen had mentioned earlier. I think it has to be a two-pronged approach. Kristen is right in that if you believe in something and something rational, like you can't possibly support a death penalty simply because you don't understand where life comes from. It is not so much that you need the people behind you before you can make your argument to the government. She's absolutely correct in that. But I think it is easier to do it if you have people behind you. You must understand that Singapore is a relatively younger country with a citizenry which has not been exposed to too much. People's thoughts and minds are shaped by what they see in the mainstream media. And of course, political parties take advantage of that. So I think there has to be, and I think there is currently a lot of effort on the part of the alternative media to educate. Unfortunately, there have been some cases where that has gone in the extreme other end, which does danger because if people put out their falsehoods, irrational arguments, it's just giving fodder to the mainstream media to say, look, we are the only ones you can trust. So I think it's important you have credible and good alternative media. And it will be a process. It's not something that is achievable in the next 3-5 years, but I have hope for this country, and things will change if we all try.
Hi, okay, so I have a question about being found not guilty in a drug trafficking case and how often that happens, because if I remember correctly, in Amara Tochi's case, the judge said that it is possible that he didn't know he was carrying drugs or something, and yet he was found guilty, right? So do you know of cases where someone charged with like how often does it happen that one is found not guilty, given the burden of proof and like previous judgments where they've said that it's entirely likely this man didn't know he was carrying drugs, but he should have known, and therefore he's sentenced to death?
This stems from the test, the legal test. The presumption is on you. So you have to prove that you didn't know that you were in possession of drugs. So it's equally, in fact, just showing that it's equally possible that you didn't know is not sufficient. So in that sense, what you really, if you think about the term they use, and it's quite telling, the term they use for someone who has been convicted, but is just a transporter, meaning a mule, they call them an innocent courier. That says a lot about what really happens at the trial. Is just that you cannot prove your innocence, and therefore you're guilty. There's no evidence that you're actually guilty. So it's a fiction. It's a legal fiction. It's just that you cannot prove. That's all that the finding is made. You run into further difficulties because now, especially where you really the evidence comes out, you really didn't know. But yet, for policy reasons, there has been convictions for people who should have asked more questions. And that's where the line becomes very blurred, because the offense is one where you need the mens rea, meaning you need to know of the type of drug that you're carrying. Of course, the burden is on you to show that you didn't know. But nonetheless, that's the law. You must know. Failure to inquire, being reckless, being rash. In fact, theoretically, you can have, and there are cases before the court now where everyone is convinced that you didn't know the type of drug that you had. But you are convicted because you knew it was drugs, but you didn't go and make the effort to find out what drug it was. So then there's this argument, were you willfully blind? Or the failure to inquire, because you failed to inquire, you cannot prove you didn't know. So it all becomes very, very messy, and you have to perform a lot of mental gymnastics to understand what's happening. And I don't think the law is in a satisfactory condition as far as this mental element. Why is it that there are cases which can be read to suggest that rashness, recklessness, failure to inquire can result in a finding that you knew? So I think that's part of the law has to be, and I think it will be clarified soon.